this video, which is a part of my lecture series on Robinson Crusoe, which you have been watching, we would do a formal analysis of the novel, and we would analyze the way in which the novel has been constructed, drawing upon several traditions of writing which were available to Defoe. So, first of all, as you have studied in the section of socio-political history, the socio-cultural history of the 18th century, you have noticed that 18th century witnessed the rise of the novel. It is often believed that it was the age of prose and reason, and novel emerged as the dominant genre of that age. Before that, you do not find novels per se. In fact, arguably, Robinson Crusoe is the first English novel. And you have also seen how periodicals developed, how the coffee houses emerged as public spheres, the circulating libraries emerged as places where people used to go and read books and then converse, have discourses upon them. And primarily they belong to the middle class, which was gradually gaining their financial as well as cultural capital. Now, this novel is a hybrid genre. It combines several kinds of writing. Within a single novel, you will find there would be poetry, there would be drama, as there would be dialogues. Lyricism would be there, so hence poetry would be very, very poetic at times. It would also draw upon the tradition of journalistic writing, which would focus upon minute details, facts, so to speak. So hence it was a hybrid genre. And the narrative of Robinson Crusoe is infused with the rhetoric of Puritanism, as we discussed in one of my previous videos, that the rhetoric of Puritanism, spiritual autobiography, animates the text. Written at a time when travel narratives were gaining currency, Defoe, in fact, fuses travel narrative with spiritual autobiography. So the tradition of travel narrative was already there. People were writing about their travels. I would give you a few examples soon. And on the other hand, there was already a very, very well-established tradition of writing which is known as spiritual autobiography. Again, there would be few notable examples that I would share with you. Now, Defoe combines these two, and hence if you are doing a formal analysis of Robinson Crusoe, if you're writing anything about the form of the novel in your answers, you have to deal with this fusion, the way in which Defoe fuses the travel narrative and spiritual autobiography. In fact, this particular video would enable you to address all the questions that can come on this text, that can be asked on the basis of this text, because form is not to be considered in isolation, right? Form has a close connection with the themes with which the work of art deals. So never think that when you are doing a formal analysis, you are doing it in isolation, completely marooned from the themes with which the text deals. So you are not treating form as something which is isolated from the theme, as Crusoe was isolated from the civilized world, right? So the first example that we find in case of spiritual autobiography is William Turner's William, William Turner, Turner, and then I have written apostrophe S because it is William Turner's complete history of the most remarkable providences, both of judgment and mercy. This was published in 1697. Right. So, complete history, the spelling is archaic in nature. Complete history of the most remarkable providences. I have explained the meaning of providence in my video which deals with the religious theme of the novel Robinson Crusoe. So, complete history of the most remarkable providences, both of judgment and mercy. So, here again you can see how providences become important for a person who is extremely cautious of the things that he does, right? The aftermath of the things that he does, the judgment, whether God would judge him and have mercy upon him, or would judge him as a sinful person. So these are the aftermaths of his works. So William Turner writes Complete History of the Most Remarkable Providences, both of Judgment and Mercy, 1697, and then Providence Displayed by none other than Alexander Selkirk. Okay, Alexander Selkirk is very important for us. Why? Because he is often considered as the real Robinson Crusoe. Actually, Alexander Selkirk was marooned to an island for about 3-4 years, and then he finally got rescued, and his story, his real life story, inspired Defoe to write about a character called Robinson Crusoe. So Alexander Selkirk is often considered as the real life Robinson Crusoe. So he also wrote one spiritual autobiography which was published in 1712, and the name of that spiritual autobiography was Providence Displayed. Okay, and it was again another adventure writing. So this is what in fact inspired Defoe quite a lot. Then there is guide tradition, which was a branch of popular homiletic tradition. A homily is a religious discourse intended for spiritual edification, spiritual education. So that is homily. Okay, Homily. And guide tradition belongs to this popular homiletic tradition, which warns its readers about the perils of life, and it is designed to provide ready-to-hand instructions to the readers, what the reader should do, what the reader shouldn't do. It deals with nature of calling, that someone has a nature of calling, that means the sea would call him all the time. As Robinson Crusoe would share his experiences with the reader, he would often refer to this call, that he would say that I have an urge to go to the sea and I can't help it, right? And that's why I disobeyed my father. And then filial obedience. So you have an onus of obedience. You ought to obey your father and you defy that. And then resistance to temptation. These are the familiar themes. You get tempted and then you resist that. So that is also another theme in the popular homiletic tradition called guide tradition. Okay, so all these are present in Robinson Crusoe. If you read it carefully, you would find that. And there is again this pilgrim's tradition, which you would find in works like Grace Abounding, which was published in 1666 by John Bunyan, Bunyan. So John Bunyan's Grace Abounding belonged to the tradition of spiritual autobiography. It is also known as pilgrim tradition, where a wayward man works hard and by dint of God is saved eventually. He goes away from the path of God and then finally he is saved by God. Now, a very important fact that you need to remember is that Crusoe's name probably originated from the name of Defoe's schoolmate Timothy Crusoe. Okay, the spelling is a bit different, Cruso, and then he adds the E to the end and makes it Crusoe, who wrote several guidebooks. So, Timothy Crusoe was a schoolmate of Defoe, and he wrote several guidebooks, including The Usefulness of Spiritual Wisdom, then God, the Guide of Youth, which was published in 1695. These were written specifically for a young man who is about to embark on a voyage, and his guidebooks suggested that human beings in this world are like travelers, deserted or exiled. They seek God as a guide. In fact, Defoe himself wrote a few guidebooks. He wrote The New Family Instructor, which was published in 1727, and Religious Courtship, which was published in 1722. Right, so these are the traditions which were already available when Defoe starts writing Robinson Crusoe. And hence he draws upon the tradition of spiritual autobiography and the tradition of guidebook. Now, if we talk about the language of the novel, you will find that there are long sentences. Crusoe has a verbosity in his sentence. He's verbose. He's at times very tedious, and that's why you may find it a bit difficult and tedious to read the novel. Lack of strong pauses within a sentence gives Defoe's style an urgent, immediate, breathless quality, according to Jan Watt. And this facilitates the narrative pace and density of events. And Defoe's concern with verisimilitude and materiality is also visible in the novel. You already know that Defoe tried his hand at journalism, and hence he is concerned with verisimilitude and the materiality of things. So he would give you elaborate and precise depiction of places and things, detailed account of Crusoe's commercial successes, and all these things are strengthening the theme of Homo economicus. So when you are dealing with this theme, you are trying to write an answer where you deal with the theme of Homo economicus, or Crusoe as the economic man, or the myth of the economic man. You have to refer to the language in this way, that how Defoe minutely captures the details of each and everything. In fact, he gives the kind of accurate description of, as it were, of the islands where Crusoe visits. And this immediacy of observation is allied to a reflective awareness. So he's aware of his own position and he reflects upon that. He introspects. Whatever he does, he introspects. And this is how Defoe draws upon the tradition of spiritual autobiography, which is all about introspection. Whether I am going away from God or whether I am going towards God. That is the outcome of your introspection. If you can take that decision, that whether you can know whether you are going away from God or going or proceeding further in the path of God, all these things are concerned with your reflective awareness. So on the one hand, this entire commercial enterprise, and allied to that is Defoe's attention to the materiality of things, the precise depiction of places and objects. On the other hand, we have the spiritual dimension of the novel, which is projecting Crusoe as a spiritually awakened person, a religious person, right? And Hence, you will find the strong present tense quality, which is infused with a sense of retrospection and introspection. It is often considered as the first English novel. It has a pseudo-authentic style. So the style which you are talking about when you are talking about Robinson Crusoe is basically a pseudo-authentic style. And many a time, Crusoe's terms are directly religious, but the theological reference are mostly subordinate to Defoe's narrative, as it struggles to trace the reformation of Crusoe's conscience. Right? So, the theological reference means the biblical allusions, the myth of the prodigal son, to which, for instance, Crusoe refers to. Okay, they are all subordinate to Defoe's narrative, that ultimately Defoe is telling you the truth. Okay, and the entire theological referent, the collection of theological reference, the biblical allusions or the theme of spiritual crisis, all these things are trying to foreground the struggles of Defoe to trace Crusoe's conscience, right? And the stylistic movement is from just history of fact to straight journal to journal, interrupted and dissolved by reflection and retrospection. So there would be a movement which you can trace. One is just history of fact, whatever is happening, he's relating to it, relating us to it, relating that to us. And then there is a straight journal. Journalistic entries are there with dates, with coordinates of places, right? And then that particular journalistic writing gets interrupted and often dissolved, subsumed by the reflection and retrospection, which is again very, very spiritual and often religious in nature. The actual subject is the narrative in its relation to consciousness. So to achieve his idiom of realism, Defoe presents circumstantial accounts in a reflective context, thereby making them appear more true than mere chronicles or journals. Okay, so if you read the Norton critical edition on Robinson Crusoe, you will realize this, that how in fact you have to read the essay by John Bender, The Novel and the Rise of the Penitentiary, Robinson Crusoe. In my edition it is in page 390, and I am quoting from 394, where this precise mark has been given by John Bender. Okay, so this essay, The Novel and the Rise of the Penitentiary, Robinson Crusoe, is very, very important. You would find this in the Norton critical edition of Robinson Crusoe, where John Bender argues that Defoe creates his own idiom of realism by presenting circumstantial accounts in a reflective context, in a context where you have a reflective protagonist, a protagonist who ponders upon minute things. He reflects upon his deeds. And in this way, Defoe makes them appear more true than mere facts, mere chronicles or journals, right? So the spiritual autobiographical tradition, the tradition of guidebook, and then the journalistic writing, travel writing, all come together to give you a work which is hybrid in nature and creates a world of realism for us, right? So this is what the novel would be doing in the subsequent centuries. It would create a world for you which would appear real. At the same time, it would appear very, very reflective, very, very spiritual in nature, right? So Defoe's realism thus incorporates and subordinates other forms, that is the guidebook, spiritual autobiography, adventure story, journals, chronicles, etc., into what Bakhtin calls polyglossia. So I am referring to Mikhail Bakhtin, the famous critic from Russia, theorist from Russia. He belonged to the Frankfurt School of Criticism. You will learn about him when you read 20th century literary theories. And polyglossia refers to the multiple meanings, the multiple voices that a novel would incorporate. So this is the characteristic feature of the novel, which would contain contradictory voices. And this is what Mikhail Bakhtin writes. Mikhail spelling is Mikhail, and Bakhtin spelling is Bakhtin. So he wrote a book called The Dialogic Imagination, which was published in 1975. The Dialogic Imagination by Mikhail Bakhtin, where he talks about polyglossia or heteroglossia. Okay. And here we find the secular obfuscating the religious, the journalistic obscuring the retrospective. So on the one hand, John Bender says that Defoe's realism subsumes or subordinates other forms of work, other genres. On the other hand, Bakhtin would say that it contains several voices altogether, right? Now, what we find here in Defoe is a quest for some material equivalent, the formation of thought through generic types. The novel, as it were, subsumes the genres and comes to terms with its own form, the consciousness-centric, reflective, but pseudo-authentic. So, here you have to take the novel Robinson Crusoe as consciousness-centric, reflective, but pseudo-authentic. It is not authentic. It cannot be. Novel may claim to be realistic, but it cannot be real, right? It is always a concocted story, which comes to us through a medium, and that medium is definitely not transparent. You would understand this element of realism when you read modernism, and you will come to know about it. I have a lecture series on modernism where I talk a lot about the modernist movement and how it challenged the 19th century and the 18th century, 19th century's realism, the tradition of realism that developed in the 18th and 19th centuries. So in Robinson Crusoe, readers enter the mental world of the protagonist and thereby fictionally view reality as a network of contingencies which are dependent upon observation of Crusoe. Right? So we have contingencies, we have consequences, and we have observation, which is reflective in nature. Okay, so that is how you have to connect Robinson Crusoe, the novel, with the rise of the novel as a genre. Okay, so here we end our video. Thanks a lot for watching.